everyone, welcome back to OntarioCyrptids. Hope you all had a great week and are enjoying your weekend. It has been a scorcher here in Toronto. We've had some storms roll in, but it has not cooled things down enough, at least not for myself. If you're active in the outdoors, make sure that you guys stay hydrated, preferably water, if you know what I mean. All right, before we get to today's story, I want to thank you all for your likes and comments on last week's episode, which drove up the number of viewer counts rather quickly. And thanks to all the latest subscribers, which made us reach 2.5k subscribers. I appreciate you guys very much. Thank you. Today I have two stories to share with you. One is from Oklahoma and the other one is from Arkansas. And if these stories remind you of an encounter that you may have had and would like to share, then please forward your stories to OntarioCyrptids@gmail.com. I would be honored to share your story with like-minded people. Go grab yourself a beverage and get cozy in your favorite spot and sit back and relax. So this first one takes place in June of 2009, and we are going to McCurtain County, Oklahoma, and the nearest town is Baptist. Now, if we take a look at this location, there's a lot of farmland, although it is bordered by a lot of forest. So let's get to the story. A little background to Discovery. We were on a short vacation in southeast Oklahoma, just a couple of miles south of the U.S. Post Office in Baptist, Oklahoma. We rented a cabin on the Glover River for a couple of nights. My children and I had just returned from a camping trip in the Wichita Mountains in the southwestern Oklahoma, and I rented this cabin so my wife could come with us this time. The cabin had beds and air conditioning, which was a prerequisite for my wife coming along. The road to the cabin was on the corner where the post office sat in Baptist. Directly across the street from the turnoff was the Baptist Public School building. The elementary was down the road a couple of 100 yards to the west. Again, the cabins are 2.3 miles, my estimate, south of the post office. The cabin is somewhat remote, but not terribly so. It is in the area just between Ouachita National Forest and Weyerhaeuser lands. If you look on a topo map of Oklahoma, you will see what I mean. There was timberland that had been harvested on the way into the cabin site, so Weyerhaeuser had been active in that area. The cabin was one of 3 that people could rent on the Weyerhaeuser land that also had an office/house for the proprietors just next door to a farmhouse. The farmer owned the lands adjacent to the cabin to the north, east, and south. I assumed the land on the north bank was his. The cabins laid alongside the Glover River, which, from what my wife read, was one of the few remaining pristine rivers in the U.S., having never been dammed. The forest was along the river in a band about 100 to 200 yards across each side of the river. It is wider in some areas and was so thick we couldn't see any open land on the opposite bank. The flora and fauna was near pristine as well, except for the farm animals, of course, mostly cattle, and I did see a number of trout in the river which had to have been stocked. When we arrived at the cabin around 5 p.m., we could hear an eagle sounding off. It called for a couple of hours. I never could see the bird because it was downriver just past a bend. I couldn't locate it, and since I was busy unloading the car and getting us situated, I failed to go far enough downstream to find it. I'm very familiar with most of the calls of the local fauna, and this call was definitely an eagle. I have an undergraduate degree in zoology. I've seen and heard them many times in central and south central Oklahoma on Lake Arcadia and the Washita River, so I know they live and nest in Oklahoma. At least they spend the spring and summer in Oklahoma. I've never seen them in the winter. The sound was almost the same as the African fish eagle, which looks very much like a bald eagle, only smaller. I lived for a time in East Africa and was very familiar with the fauna there as well, especially the birds. After getting us situated, my kids and I walked up the road towards the office to receive a canoe to row down the river to our cabin. We found a print at about 6 or 6:30 p.m. on June 22, 2009. My son and I discovered it at the same time, and my daughter noticed it half a second later. It was a very large human-looking footprint that is consistent with Sasquatch prints depicted in books and on the internet. I took a photo of it, but the low sun cast a shadow in the print that makes it difficult to see. I took the photo after we collected the canoes using my cell phone, as we forgot to bring our cameras on this trip. It must have been about 30 to 45 minutes after we returned to the cabin with the canoe. I stacked a few small rocks next to the print so that I could locate it again. For what it's worth, the print was just one single print of a right foot that was in the loose dirt just off the edge of the graded dirt road. It was pointing towards the river in between the first cabin and the office at the bend in the road. If you stood where the print was, no one can see you from the first cabin or the office. It was just out of sight from those buildings. We were in the second cabin down the river from the office. I looked for other prints and at the foliage where it might have stepped into to get back into the trees, and I couldn't find any kind of disturbance that would indicate that the creature had walked into the foliage, nor could I find any evidence of where it came from. Across the road to the south, where I assumed it came from, is a large open field with 6-strand barbed wire fence enclosing it, too tall to step over even at 7 or 8 foot tall. I half expected to see hair on the barbed wire. I found nothing else except the one print. Both the kids and I remarked that it was too big for a man, but looked very human-like. Around dusk, I was the only one outside and I heard 2 distinct howls coming from some distant downriver. The time was probably around 8:45 or 9 p.m. Since the days are long and sunset is late, I assume this time to be near correct. I didn't look at the time to verify it though. I don't know what time sunset was on that day exactly. The time is approximate and the sound heard was at dusk and at least an hour or 2 passed when the footprint was discovered. I was out in front of the cabin coming off the road towards the front door of the cabin. All the night sounds were starting. The tree and river frogs and insects were beginning their chorus. I even heard a couple of different owls, a screech and a great horned, shortly after hearing the howls. Later, my wife was out on the porch that overlooked the river in the back of the cabin, and she said she heard a strange animal sound she had never heard before. This was about 30 minutes or so after I heard it, and of course no one else was outside at that particular moment. She said it was different from any of the other calls we were hearing that night, including the owls and the mooing cattle. When I asked her where she thought it had come from, she pointed in the same direction that I heard the howls come from. It was the same direction and farther away from the farm and cattle on down the river. I never heard what she heard, and she never heard what I heard, and the kids never heard anything at all. The howls I heard were somewhat consistent of recorded sounds on the internet of supposed Sasquatch. We never heard anything else that we heard that first night, nor did we find any other prints. However, the next day I was out front again and I heard a crashing sound as if something were walking through the forest that was large. I walked over to the fence in front of our cabin and looked across the field. There was a small, very muddy cattle tank about 25 yards across at the edge of the woods, at the end of the field, about 150 yards or so from where I was. When I looked over there, where I thought I heard the crashing sound, a murder of crows burst out of the trees going in all directions and telling whatever disturbed them of their displeasure. This was just on the other side of the tank. I never saw or heard anything more, and I don't know if it's even connected. All the cattle were in the smaller east field together. None were in this particular field. Hand/footprints. The footprints looked wide and long with 5 distinct toe prints, an obvious heel, and at the mid-tarsal area was a break that had a ridge going all the way across the foot. The ridge had a double line in it, as if it were the lines of a palm of your hand about a centimeter wide between 2 lines. There was no mistaking it for any other kind of a print. When I first went down the hill behind the cabin to the riverbank, I found what looked like a large cat print in the hardened mud coming off an animal trail out of the woods next to the slope which curved down to the riverbank. That print was neither as clear nor as obvious as the large human-like print. The large human-like print was photographed with a dollar bill next to it for scale. I did not have a tape measure to do any better. It was at least as wide as $1 and more than twice the length in my estimate. I took pictures of it, and the next day it had degraded substantially since the night before. Sounds. The howls resembled those on the website of supposed Sasquatch. I heard 2 distinct howls lasting 5 to 10 seconds each. The howls were about 3 minutes apart. They sounded very clear but far off somewhat. If it was human, they would have to be about 100 yards from me to sound as loud. They sounded somewhat human but different in a way that I can't describe. I cannot come close to imitation, but I can approximate the sound. The 2 awoos, very clear and distinct, and long in duration. I would say at least 5 to 10 seconds each. It did not sound like a coyote, cow, owl, or anything else I'm familiar with. This last encounter takes place on April of 2006, and we're going to Poinsett County, Arkansas, and the nearest town is Harrisburg. I was riding my lawnmower to the cemetery to clean up my mother's grave. I have a trail that I ride to avoid the road. I guess it was about 7:40 p.m. or so when I saw something cross the field in front of me. I had my 9-year-old golden retriever with me in the trailer that I tow behind the lawnmower. When she saw something walking across the path adjacent to the field, she started barking for a moment and then started whimpering like she was scared. When I saw the animal, I really didn't know what to think. I had seen TV shows on Bigfoot before, but they were all in other places. When I saw it cross the road, it looked like a really tall man with hair entangled in briars and leaves. When I got to where I crossed the trail, I stopped and turned the lawnmower off to see if I could hear anything. I listened, but I couldn't hear anything but my dog whining in the trailer. The hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I got scared and started the lawnmower and left. I have never seen anything like that before in my life. It was an eerie feeling to be so close to home and to see something that I have been taught could not exist. Well, me and my dog are firm believers now. There is something definitely out there in the woods, and I'll never think about going into them again unprotected. It really touches on the reality that we are not the only ones out there in the wild. There you have it, guys. 2 great stories, and that is going to be the end of our encounter stories for today. I hope you guys enjoyed these stories. Just a couple little comments here and there. I guess the thing is, you never know when you're going to see one, and it really doesn't matter where you are in North America or in Australia or in other parts of the world. I think if the environment exists for them to exist, or for something to exist, they will exist. And again, I find it fascinating that some people will not believe somebody else's encounter stories to be factual, but they have to actually have their own experience to then believe that these wild people exist out there in the world. Anyhow, that's it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have an encounter story that you would like to share, then please forward your stories to OntarioCyrptids@gmail.com. I will be honored to share your story with like-minded people. Thank you all for listening until the end. I truly appreciate it. Please hit the like button on your way out and smash that subscribe button if you're new to my channel. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay updated with all my latest uploads, or you never know when I'm going to go live. Anyhow, have a great weekend, and I hope to see you all next week right here on Ontario Cryptids.